Good evening, Healing Journey. Welcome to another learning journey when we're on this pathway together. I thank you for joining us tonight, and I thank you for allowing us to come into your homes this evening. Lee, a big welcome to you.
Good evening, Lynn, and good evening to all of our friends that find it not robbery to be here for another session of your healing journey, your learning journey, where we learn as we grow. It's just a reminder, but we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and I'm sure you know that we operate on donations and grants. So please visit our website at ourlessonslearned.org. We believe in turning adversities into strength. The healing journey is your journey to learn and heal.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much for that. I think tonight's show is something that you and I were victims of, and that was trying to control our emotions, trying to regulate them when so much is going on. And learning journey, I don't know if you all have ever been out there before where you're trying to regulate your emotions and it's so hard. Maybe you went from 0 to 50 in a moment, or maybe you could not control your crying, or just so many different emotions that you go through. I don't know if any of you have ever had a problem in managing them. Lee and I have. And I remember when I got that call that night to come pick me up, I'm arrested. I've been arrested. It was so hard for me to manage all of my emotions in a healthy, appropriate way. I was going off on this one and yelled at that one. And, you know, it was so hard because it involves recognizing and understanding and modifying my emotional responses to different situations. But at that moment, honey, I couldn't regulate anything. I couldn't modify. I didn't understand. I didn't recognize what I was doing and how I could not regulate those emotions. So, you know, when you learn to regulate your emotions, it's a skill that allows you to experience emotions fully, but in a balanced way. There was nothing balanced at that time. And at certain, you know, uh, things along the way, certain parts along the way, such as, the sentencing and things of that nature, it was still hard to regulate those emotions without letting them overwhelmed me in a negative effect, and that affected my behavior. Lee, do you remember a time like that?
Oh, sure. Remember all of what you're saying, Lynn. Um, Sometimes my mouth just kind of gets me in trouble, and my emotions are all over the place, and it just flows with some unhealthy behavior.
Hmm. Hmm. It does, and it's so hard sometimes. So when we look at it, you're like, okay, regulating your emotions, yes, regulating your emotions. It affects your mental health.
Hmm.
Regulating those emotions, emotional balance is one. Good emotional regulation helps maintain emotional balance, reducing the risk of extreme mood swings, anxiety, and depression. All of that is involved in regulating those emotions. When your emotions are well regulated, you're better able to navigate challenges without becoming overwhelmed. I didn't know it at that time. I was totally overwhelmed. So I can understand if any of you are overwhelmed at the situation because it's so hard to balance if you don't know how to balance. Lee, do you remember um, how those mental health challenges and emotional regulations affected you?
Yes, I do. Because in addition to taking care of things that I needed to take care of at home, I was still working and commuting back and forth or so. So again, my emotions were all over the place, and I think almost everyone kind of suffered as a result of that.
Yes.
Because I didn't have my emotions balanced at that time, and I wasn't. I didn't know anything about it. I guess I wasn't concerned with it at that time because my concern was my child in a place that he wasn't familiar with, something that I didn't know anything about, and I just didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah, it's something. How about stress?
Well, certainly the this can lead to stress, and however, can reduce that stress with effective emotional regulations that allow individuals to manage the stress and cope with difficult situations without becoming overly reactive and anxious, which can reduce the risk of developing mental health issues.
That's so true. Stress reduction. When you're overwhelmed, that stress is going to be there, and that can release also that cortisone hormone, that stress in your body, and can raise your when you can't regulate those emotions. That has a lot to do with higher cholesterol, your blood pressure, and things of that nature. And really, it can really mess with your other relationships. Have you thought about that? The other relationships, so when you learn to regulate your emotions, you can have improved relationships, and people can communicate more effectively and maintain healthier, more positive relationships. Unregulated emotions can lead to conflicts and, sure, misunderstandings.
Mm.
How about increased resilience, Lee?
Yeah, that can increase your resilience. Those who regulate their emotions well are generally more resilient in the face of adversities, which contributes to better mental health overall.
Yes, yes, it's something. So you're asking, okay, what can you do? Well, prevention of negative mental health outcomes, poor emotional regulation can contribute, as we said, to mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and also anger. How many of you were angry at this whole situation? I was. I was very angry at the whole situation. People who struggle with emotional regulation may find themselves sometimes or frequently overwhelmed, which can exacerbate or contribute to many mental health challenges. So, we have to look at the emotions that are linked to um, certain disorders, and people may have intense moods because of poorly regulated emotions. So please keep that in mind, because different disorders are affected by poor emotional regulation, such as PTSD. Yes, this causes the trauma from the incident that can cause emotional deregulation, where you can't regulate because the trauma and everything that's involved. It can also affect depression, where it's difficulty for people with depression who struggle with that to regulate those emotions. And anxiety is another one
Mhm.
that can help. And also, one thing that people overlook when they're really stressed out are eating disorders. And eating disorders can happen sometimes from poor emotional regulation. And many individuals struggle to regulate their emotions, often find food that is their comfort, and they may find that way of coping, but that's an overwhelming feeling because they can binge eat and then maybe do some purging incidents, such as, regurgitating or uh, different things to purge that food out. So that is not a good idea. And then a lot of people who can't regulate those emotions, you know what? They might go to substances that may help them. They may start drinking. They might turn to alcohol as a way to manage those intense negative emotions. And it can be hard because then that'll put them in a cycle of addiction. They may find some other drugs, oxycodone, and things of that nature that can numb the emotional pain that they can't regulate those emotions at that time. So that is one thing that is just very hard. Different mood disorders, like depression and cyclothymia, which is a milder form of bipolar disorder, or even seasonal depression. People talk about seasonal affective disorder. That can result in emotional dysregulation. And seasonal affective disorder, that means that people may go into depression at certain times of the year. It could be when the time changes. It gets dark at 4:30, and you just can't regulate that emotion of feeling lonely, and you might eat too much, and you can't regulate those emotions that go along with the season, such as the fourth quarter of the year, the holidays without your loved one. And regulating those emotions are very, very important at that time of year. But you'll notice that time of year, some people automatically suffer with depression. And we call that, a milder form of certain things. So, Lee, why is emotional regulation important
It
for
well,
these disorders that I just talked about?
they're important because they're difficult. It become difficult in managing emotions, and as a result of that, it can go directly to increased distress, in
Hmm.
impaired functioning, and sometimes it can go into physical and mental health, your physical and mental. It becomes unregulated emotions that can escalate the problems and create a cycle of negative thinking and behavior. Your emotionally overwhelmed individuals, they might struggle with relationships, work, and other aspects of their daily life. Poor emotion regulation can lead to physical symptoms, headaches, muscle tension, and exacerbate existing mental health issues. So we want to try to stay from away from as best we can. Regulating your emotions, it's a difficult thing, but it can be done, and it's important for the caregiver as well as for your emotional regulation, or important for your loved one. And you want to pay attention to your loved ones. You're on that phone call with them, when you're at a face-to-face visit. You want to pay close attention to the emotions that you're seeing and stuff, because it could be something deeper that's going on. They may want to discuss it with you, they may not discuss it with you, but pay close attention to them, because it can lead to something more severe.
Exactly. And thank you, Lee. Increased distress, you're going to have a cycle of negative thinking and behavior. So you want to make sure that you can regulate those emotions, because that cycle of negative thinking and behavior can lead you right into that deep, dark hole of depression. So you want to make sure that you're trying to regulate those emotions. That's a great time to call on your support team and say, hey, I'm dealing with some negative emotions right now. I need you to, talk me through this, support me through this, help me through it. However, you want to do it, it's regulating those emotions. And you might say, well, you know what? What are some coping skills that I can use to regulate those emotions? Well, the first one is mindfulness. And we've talked a lot about mindfulness, being in the moment. If you're back here in yesterday and you're trying to project the future, you're not in the moment. Being mindful means to keep you in the here and now. So mindfulness techniques, practicing that, paying attention to your thoughts and feelings. Also, your thoughts and feelings sometimes are manifested through body sensations. So physically, you want to make sure that you are also on top of those bodily sensations without judgment. And, I want you to make sure that you're preventing some impulsive reactions. Sometimes we're impulsive and we don't think things through. When we can't regulate our emotions, it's hard for us to make good decisions. So we want to regulate those emotions and put decision making on hold for that moment. Also, cognitive reframing, let's reframe things, and that changes the way we think. My thing is, let's change the way we look at things. Let's change our lens. When we change our lens, we can look at a situation differently, and we can alter our emotional response. That is important. So instead of seeing a challenging task as overwhelming, let's reframe it and look at it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Everything that we go through, if we look at it through negative lens, we'll never see why we had to go through it and what was the beauty in going through it. Because everything we go through, we do get a chance to learn. Then we look at our breathing exercises. Deep breathing can really help with the anxiety. And we're talking about that diagram, really bringing that deep breathing in. And that can help calm the nervous system. It can reduce stress and help you gain control over some of those strong emotional reactions. And we all have those from time to time. Even a therapist has those strong emotional reactions sometimes. So it's good to be able to, you know, breathe deeply, and that helps. Also, relaxation techniques, engage in progressive muscle relaxation, yoga. Like I said, on YouTube, there's some yoga on there, and those things are free. You can also go on YouTube, and YouTube also has, some breathing exercises, and that's going to help you. And there's some distress tolerance skills. We talk about being in distress. So, techniques such as grounding exercises, or you might say, what is grounding? Well, if you sit up on the edge of your chair and you take the heels of your feet and you're imagining pushing them down into the deep, dark soil, it's cool and it's cold, and you feel grounded. You feel that is a grounding exercise for you. And then emotional awareness, understanding the root causes of your emotions, recognizing those emotional triggers. Now, we all have family, we all have friends that can trigger emotions and a negative emotional reaction. Maybe that's not the time to be around that person until you learn to regulate those emotions. Think about that. Lee, would you like to think about to talk about, some of the emotional awareness and the behavioral strategies?
Well, they include engaging in physical exercise. Listening to music can also help. Positive activities that help with your emotional state, a balanced state, a balanced one. Seeking professional
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
help, therapy, positive cognitive behavior therapy, or can be directly helpful in learning and practicing emotional skills.
Yes. And CBT, we call it cognitive behavioral therapy, because what we do is we look at, sometimes we have a distorted view. So we change our lens and look at things differently, and that can help. That is a behavior therapy. Also, dialectical behavior therapy, and that can be helpful. And that therapy really helps with distress tolerance with emotions, and it's doing the opposite of the emotion. So we want to look at that. And by incorporating these responses, people or individuals can improve their emotional regulation, which will lead to better health, better mental health overall, and your better well being. So, it's very important that you use these strategies that will help you so much. And if you look at one thing that God says about this as we bring it in, you know God is an emotional being as well. If you think about this season, Jesus went through a lot of suffering, but he he sat there, and it was hard for him in the beginning. to regulate that emotion. Remember, he said, Father, will you just take this cup away from me? Why do I have to go through this? So he was crying out to God at that time. And he had to go through this season of his life. And believe me, I am paraphrasing, okay? You need to read that Bible and see what he was going through emotionally because he was here in the human form. So, he experienced anger. He wept and he grieves, and he does that. But God is never anxious. He's never lustful, greedy, bitter, with selfish ambition. He's never small minded or petty. Neither is he anxious or fretful, but dwells in perfect peace. So those are the things. If we learn to regulate our emotions and give certain things to God, he will keep us in perfect peace. So we just wanted to, you know provide that wealth of wisdom for you, and how to manage your emotions so you can cultivate that inner peace, because we don't know how long you're going to have to go through. I'm 13, starting 14 years, 13 years. I lost count because I know I got to go through it daily. So, it's hard. And Lee, I'm sure you can attest to regulating your emotions and what you've had to go through, and how that inner peace is important.
Yeah, one day leads to the other. And as you said, you kind of lose track of time because it's going to be a while, and counting days not going to help you any. So, yeah, you want to kind of put it to the side or so, but you want to reduce that. You want to regulate your emotions. And I also want to say that I'm on the back side of it, and it's there's still some emotions that regulated there too, because once they come, you're dealing with the job situation, home situation, friends that have not been there for you, and
Yeah.
wonder, well, why weren't they there? Why didn't they come to visit? Why didn't they put money on the commissary? So there are a lot of other things that you deal with on the back end. There's family members that kind of push you to the side and kind of say things under your breath too. And these are family members that you have to be concerned with. So there's a lot on the backside of being incarcerated too that you deal with once they come out of that situation.
Exactly. And that is so important and is so true. And when we look at it, we want to look at it from a standpoint of, Leela had put in here, it's also very important to establish a support group to help you through these times. Yes, that support group is so important. And you all have friends and people that can support you through. And this is the time to call them, hey, I'm suffering today. So
Mhm.
call on them. Don't think that you have too much pride. You can't call on. That's what that support person is all about. And that's when you really find out who your real friends are. Are they good through the good? Are they there through the good and the bad? So that is what is important. And don't forget to call on God, because He knows all, sees all, and He is our comforter in the time of trouble. And He gives us His grace, and his grace is what we need to go through. So tonight we just wanted to bring that to you, and let you know that it's important to regulate those emotions, and breathing exercises, relaxation techniques, emotional awareness, behavioral strategies, engaging in the physical exercise, listening to music. All of these things will help you. Lee, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I just hope that everyone has learned, as I learned, to regulate our emotions. It's helpful for your own mental health as well as the mental health of your loved one that's been incarcerated or arrested. It's to your advantage to not only listen, but tune into those emotions and that seem different or unusual, either on the phone or on the face to face visit. These emotions can say more than they physically see. Poor emotion regulation can lead to physical symptoms, again, like your headache, muscle tension, and other illness. Please act on it. Question it. Make phone calls through your research to the proper channels in your state. It's very important during the arrest and incarceration.
Thank you, Lee. That was so timely and so much needed. So the one thing I want to leave you with, peace and rest in God. The
Mhm.
Bible repeatedly encourages seeking peace and rest in God, which can help regulate emotions. This includes finding moments of quiet reflection and trusting in God's sovereignty. Just trust Him like you've never done before. And when you do that, He will see you through this storm and regulate those emotions for you. So until we see you again, we wish you peace, live, love, and regulate those emotions. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
We'll see you at Easter. Goodbye for now.